The gentle rhythm of the sea was a lullaby I had not known I needed, a soft counterpoint to the clinking of my chains, now mercifully absent. After all the tumult in Jerusalem, the endless accusations and the long journey to Caesarea, it had finally been determined. Yes, it was finally settled that we, I, Paul, and a number of other prisoners, should indeed sail for Italy. It felt less like a decree and more like a quiet unfolding, a path laid out by hands far greater than any emperor's. Our keeper for this voyage, a centurion named Julius from the Augustan cohort, was a man of quiet authority, his eyes holding a depth that spoke of many campaigns, many hard decisions. Yet there was a kindness about him, a gentle respect that was not always afforded to a man in my position, a prisoner awaiting trial before Caesar himself. He had seen me, I think, not merely as a charge but as a person, perhaps even a fellow traveller on life's unpredictable currents. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, a vessel stout and sturdy, designed for coastal trading, not for grand imperial voyages. Yet it was our conveyance. As the ropes were cast off and the sails unfurled, a sense of something approaching peace settled over me. The air, crisp with the tang of salt and the faintest hint of distant pine, filled my lungs, and for a moment I could almost forget the heavy implications of my journey. My faithful companion Luke was there beside me, his scroll and stylus never far from his hand, his quiet presence a steady anchor in my often turbulent life. And Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, also stood with us, a loyal friend choosing to share this uncertain passage. The first day was a blessing. The sea was a vast, shimmering sapphire, barely ruffled by the softest breath of wind. The sun, warm upon my face, chased away the chill of apprehension that had clung to me for so long. The ship with its broad hull and towering mast moved with an easy grace, carving a smooth furrow through the water, leaving a frothy, ephemeral trail that quickly faded into the endless expanse. I leaned against the rough timber of the rail, feeling the subtle vibration of the planks beneath my palms, the faint scent of pitch and salt, a comforting presence. We put to sea, intending to sail by the coasts of Asia, tracing the familiar outlines of the land that held so many memories, so many churches I had helped to birth. And the very next day, a small miracle occurred. We landed at Sidon. Centurion Julius, true to the kindness I had sensed in him, treated me with remarkable courtesy. He did not confine me to the ship, but gave me liberty, permission to go to my friends in the city, to receive their care, to share a meal, to feel human touch again, outside the confines of my situation. It was a reprieve, a small oasis of normalcy in the desert of my circumstances. The brief stop in Sidon, the warmth of fellowship, the simple taste of fresh bread and wine lingered with me as we once again set sail. The sea continued its gentle rocking, a rhythmic sway that could almost convince a man that all was well, that no storm could ever truly disturb such tranquility. We sailed past the shores of Asia, the gentle rocking of the vessel lulling us into a false sense of security. But the wind began to shift, forcing us to struggle against contrary gales. The vessel no longer glided, but wrestled, leaning against an unseen hand. For many days we sailed slowly, arriving with difficulty off Cnidus. The wind wouldn't permit us to hold our course, pushing us southward. So we sailed under the shelter of Crete, off Salmone. The sea, once a calm friend, hinted at its wilder nature, a subtle tightening in its rhythm, a deeper sigh in its swells. The sky held a bruised violet hue on the horizon, whispering of distant turmoil. We hugged the coast, seeking shelter, until we reached fair havens near Lycia. There we lingered. Days lengthened into weeks, the autumn light growing thinner. A chill seeped into my bones, a premonition more than mere temperature change. I watched the sky, felt the wind, listened to the ship's creaking, and a deep unease settled within me, a familiar stir of the spirit. The Day of Atonement, marking the season of perilous sailing, had already passed. I knew the Mediterranean could turn treacherous. I knew the sea's wrath. 3 shipwrecks before this, 3 nights and a day spent in the open sea, clinging to hope and prayer. My body remembered the salt's bite, the wind's sting, the despair of powerlessness. Now my spirit echoed those memories with new urgency, a divine prompting. I approached Centurion Julius, the ship's owner and the captain. Their faces showed the frustration of being becalmed in a harbour, not ideal for wintering. "Sirs," I began, my voice low, hoping my conviction would carry weight. "I perceive this voyage will bring injury and much loss, not only of cargo and ship, but also of our lives." A quiet, heavy pause followed, laden with unspoken doubts. I saw the centurion's glance flicker between me, a prisoner, and the seasoned mariners. It was reasonable hesitation. Why trust a land-bound preacher over men who measured lives in knots and tides? The ship owner, whose fortunes were tied to the timbers, looked at me with polite skepticism. The captain, his hands calloused, gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Fair Havens, they argued, was not a convenient winter harbour. It was exposed, offering little comfort or commerce. They favoured Phoenix, a harbour on Crete facing southwest and northwest, a much more desirable place to spend the winter. This promise of a safer, more hospitable refuge was tempting. The majority on board, swayed by the captain's and owner's expertise and the natural human inclination for comfort, agreed. So the decision was made. The centurion, weighing practical advice against his prisoner's uncanny premonition, ultimately trusted the men of the sea. I understood the logic, the earthly wisdom of it. It made sense in a way divine foresight often does not. A subtle shift in the air, a colder breath, confirmed my apprehension. The distant horizon darkened, gathering into an ominous presence. The water around the hull, once lapping softly, began to slap with a firmer, more insistent rhythm. The men stirred, preparing for departure, their movements carrying a nervous energy. Ropes unfurled, anchors weighed, sails slowly caught the light, deceitful breeze. With a heavy heart, I watched them set sail from Fair Havens, ignoring the quiet warnings of the sea, and the spirit within me. That southern breeze, promising safe passage to Phoenix, proved a cruel trick. It lulled the centurion, pilot and ship's owner, into false security, dismissing my concerns as a land dweller's anxieties. They believed they had what they wanted, sailing close to Crete, feeling a fleeting mastery. But the sea, my friend, is fickle. Not far from fair havens, the sky, moments ago overcast, ripped open with a sound like tearing linen. It was no gradual change, but an explosion of raw power, a furious northeasterly gale. The Euraquilo itself descended with terrifying, instantaneous violence, stealing breath from every man. One moment the ship was a sturdy vessel, ploughing with purpose. The next, it was a toy snatched by a giant's whim. The wind shrieked, a guttural scream drowning all sound, tearing at the sails until the canvas groaned, threatening to shred from the mast. The air itself seemed to solidify, pushing, pressing down, making it difficult to breathe, stand, or even think. The previously placid sea, a gentle cradle, now erupted into a chaotic maelstrom. Waves, once mere undulations, rose like enraged giants, their foamy crests reaching skyward before crashing down with battering force. Salt water lashed our faces, blinding, stinging, mixing with sudden cold rain hurled horizontally. The ship lurched, not with familiar roll, but with a sickening, violent shudder, threatening to dislodge every timber. I watched the sailors, men seasoned to these waters, their hands calloused from rope and sun. Their initial confidence and camaraderie vanished, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Shouts were swallowed by the roaring wind, frantic gestures futile. They struggled with the rigging, pulling, straining to turn the ship into the wind. Useless, caught, unable to head into the wind. We were simply driven along, a leaf on a torrent. A quiet thought flickered through my mind. Perhaps an empathetic, "I told you so." Not a smugness, but a sorrowful understanding that wisdom comes at a terrible price. The centurion, Julius, his face pale and grim, no longer sought reassurance from pilot or owner. His eyes, filled with trepidation, met mine, a silent acknowledgement of the storm I had foreseen. The ship's timbers groaned and shrieked, a mournful symphony of stress as waves lifted us high, then dropped us into terrifying troughs like the deep's maw. The scent of damp wood and churning salt filled my nostrils, mingling with fear's metallic tang from every man. The world outside ceased to exist, replaced by a swirling vortex of wind, water, terror. We were no longer sailing. We were simply enduring, clinging to existence as the Euraquilo raged, a furious living entity determined to consume all in its path, tossing our once proud vessel like a mere toy. The ship, once a proud vessel, became a mere toy in the relentless grip of the storm, tossed and battered without mercy. The fury of the Euraquilo did not wane. It deepened, growing into a relentless, roaring beast that swallowed the sky. Days bled into nights, indistinguishable one from another, as the sun, a distant memory, refused to show its face. The stars, those ancient navigators of the deep, were utterly obscured by the thick, churning canopy of clouds, heavy with rain and sea spray. We drifted, truly lost now, with no fixed point to guide our weary eyes, no horizon to offer even a fleeting promise of stability. Either know if the vessel groaned under strain, timbers protesting with every lurch and dive, an incessant creaking, the wind shrieked through the rigging, drilling into my bones. Cold, relentless spray lashed over the decks, soaking us, chilling us deeply. Our damp clothes clung. The taste of salt was constant, metallic, bitter, mingling with unspoken fear in every man's eyes. Hope like the sun had vanished. Days blurred, time lost its meaning. Every moment became a struggle. Sleep was restless, if it came, punctuated by lurches. Each morning brought only chaos and dread. We were utterly adrift, defined solely by the storm's endless roar and crash. Despair settled deep, a heavy cloak weighing on every soul. In desperation, sailors began lightening the ship. With grunts, they heaved precious provisions, grain, oil, overboard. Each splash was a mournful thud, a death knell for our hopes. Still insufficient, they cut loose the ship's tackle, ropes, sails, heavy rigging. This act of surrender, a desperate gamble, only highlighted our utter helplessness against the storm. For all their effort, the ship remained a toy. A profound sense of futility settled over us, heavier than any cargo. This was when despair truly took root, cold and unyielding. It was a deep emotional toll, a silent scream of hopelessness, a whisper of resignation, trying to drag me down into the abyss. But an inner anchor held fast. My gaze turned inward, away from the furious world. I remembered trials, dark moments when all seemed lost, and with each memory, God's steadfast faithfulness emerged. In this overwhelming roar, I found a quiet space, a sanctuary where His presence was amplified. I closed my eyes, not in surrender to the storm, but in silent, fervent prayer, letting the chaotic symphony become a backdrop to the rhythmic, unwavering beat of my hopeful heart. I knew, with absolute certainty, that we were not truly lost. The air itself seemed heavy with brine and the bitter fear. Hope had vanished, swallowed by the sea's hungry maw. The days we'd eaten nothing, terror suppressing hunger, leaving only a hollow ache in our bodies and souls. Many, even the strongest, had succumbed to a quiet despair, their eyes vacant, hands limp, resigned to the storm's will. But despair, I knew, was simply the absence of a better story. I knew the author, through years of trials and shipwrecks, and this was not my first. I trusted God was not finished with me, or those in my charge. Finding a less violent lurch, I braced against the mast. My weary voice cut through the wind. "Men," I called out, "you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss." A few heads turned, their eyes heavy with exhaustion and suspicion, expecting only more grim news. These hardened sailors and soldiers now resembled trembling children, faces streaked with salt and grime. clothes soaked. They looked at me, a prisoner and land dweller who'd spoken of the sea's temper, with a flicker of resentment amidst their hopelessness. I didn't dwell on the past. Now I urge you to take courage, I continued, my voice battling the ceaseless roar, because not one of you will lose his life. Only the ship will be lost. These audacious words hung in the air, clashing with the splintering wood and ocean's thunder. Some blinked, others exchanged glances, a spark of curiosity flickering where despair had been. Cold spray lashed my face. The deck shifted, yet a profound peace settled within me. Last night, I explained, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship stood beside me. The raging visible storm contrasted sharply with the quiet invisible presence of a divine messenger. It was a truth meant for all. He said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you the lives of all who sail with you." I watched their faces as the words sank in, seeing understanding dawn, tension ease. The promise was clear, unconditional, from a source mightier than any storm. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. My voice, imbued with divine assurance, held a greater power than the shrieking wind and showering waves. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. A practical detail, yes, grounding the miraculous promise in a tangible though perilous future. It wasn't an immediate escape, but a promise of ultimate safety beyond this chaos. Murmurs rose, a faint stir of renewed spirit. The suffocating despair began to recede, leaving fragile, tentative hope. Weary, but with renewed spirits, we awaited God's promise, trusting rescue was on its way. The ceaseless churning of the sea had become a part of us, a rhythm of terror and exhaustion. The 14 nights a Euraquilo howled, stripping us of hope, only for the Lord to reclothe us in his promise. Now as the 14th night stretched long and heavy, a different sensation began to prick our weary awareness. A subtle shift in the wave's embrace, a different spray on the face, a deeper roar. The experienced sailors, their senses honed, felt it first. A tremor of recognition, a whisper of a possibility. I watched these men, who had all but given up, straining their ears, their eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. A hushed urgency rippled through the ship. Then came the shout, "Land!" or rather the sense of land. They moved with renewed purpose, preparing to take soundings. The heavy lead line descended into the depths. We waited, a collective breath held tight, for the measure of our fate. The call came, strained but clear. 20 fathoms. A gasp, then a flurry of movement. 20 fathoms, dangerously shallow for our ship, especially in such a storm. But it meant land. It meant the earth lay beneath the hungry waves, tantalizingly close. Moments later, the line was cast again. The tension was almost unbearable. Again the cry, with sharper alarm. 15 fathoms! The depth was decreasing rapidly. We were hurtling towards something, salvation or destruction. In the sudden flurry of frantic activity, a different panic brewed. I saw the sailors, meant to guide us, their eyes darting, their movements too stealthy. They were lowering the skiff, the small boat that had trailed behind us, now attempting escape. They pretended to be casting out anchors from the bow, but their true intent was clear. They were seeking to abandon ship, to leave us to our fate. A familiar human weakness, my voice, accustomed to commanding attention, cut through the din. Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. I called to Julius the centurion, my words echoing the divine decree I had received. This was not merely tactical. It was a reiteration of God's promise. Julius, bless his steadfast heart, understood. He commanded his soldiers. With swift, brutal efficiency, the soldiers sprang into action. Swords flashed, ropes were severed, and with a terrible groan of wood and a splash swallowed by the storm, the skiff broke free. It simply fell, tumbling into the ravenous waves, a tiny speck swallowed by the vast ocean. The sailors, caught in their deceit, were left staring at the empty space where their escape had been. The choice had been made for them. We were all in this together, bound to God's mercy and this battered vessel. The wings shrieked a fresh protest, and the waves, sensing our proximity to land, redoubled their fury. We neared the edge of the world we knew. Suddenly, with a sickening lurch, the ship shuddered violently. A sound, a grotesque symphony of groaning timber and scraping rock, tore through the air. It was not a gentle grounding, but a jarring, violent impact. The bow struck a reef, jamming fast into the seabed, unmoving. We had run aground. The rest of the ship, the stern, no longer held fast, began to writhe and groan under the relentless assault of the waves. The sea, with a primal hunger, began to tear at us. Wood shrieked, splintered and cracked. I could feel the deck beneath my feet beginning to give way, our refuge slowly being ripped apart. It was a terrifying sound, the death rattle of a great ship, amplified by the storm, by the dark. But even as the ship groaned and tore itself apart, through the roar of the waves, I could almost hear the whisper of God's promise, urging us towards the shore. Our vessel vibrated with its death throes. Timbers groaned, splintered. The stern broke, chewed by the relentless sea. Amidst the cacophony, a stillness settled. God's promise, no life lost, echoed louder than the storm. Their faces were haggard, soaked, despairing. 14 days without food, strength gone. As the ship groaned its last, I stepped forward, calm amidst the storm. "Friends," I called. 14 days without food. I held up meager hardtack. Take food for your survival. Not a hair will perish. Absurd, offering bread amid shipwreck. That strength was needed. Before them all, I took the bread and gave thanks to God. This simple act flickered light. I broke the dry crust and ate. Slowly, then with desperate hunger, the others followed. Soldiers, sailors, prisoners. We shared that last meal on the breaking deck, rekindling a spark. With fragile strength, they cast the remaining wheat into the sea. We had to abandon the dying ship. "Now," I commanded, "swimmers first, make for the land." Brave souls plunged into churning water, swallowed by foam. The cold shot Waves sought to crush us against hidden rocks, and the rest I urged. On planks, on articles from the ship. The deck tore, offering chunks as rafts. People scrambled, desperate, grabbing floating timber. Shouts splashing, and the relentless roar filled the air. I watched as waves pulled them away, a chaotic scattering. My heart ached, but I clung to the angel's words, no life lost. Then I saw the grim soldiers, swords glinting, eyes on the prisoners. I knew their intent, to kill them. Cold dread pierced me. Before they could act, Centurion Julius, exhausted but clear-eyed, barked, "No, do not harm them." He remembered my words, the promise of life. Because of his mercy and trust, soldiers were restrained. Instead of death, they guided men to the water, ensuring each a piece of wood, a splinter of hope. Extraordinary grace amidst chaos. The journey through waves was torment, each stroke a battle, each breath a victory. My limbs ached, but the shore, a dark smudge against dawn, beckoned. I felt the currents drag. Then, the blessed scrape of sand beneath my fingers, my knees, my body. I crawled, gasped onto solid ground, collapsing. Relief, a physical weight, pushed out fear and adrenaline. One by one they emerged from the foam, wet, shivering, but alive. Julius, soldiers, sailors, my dear Luke, all the prisoners, 276 souls, against all odds washed ashore. We huddled, gasping, teeth chattering, the cold wind biting. Shivering and exhausted, we gathered on the strange shore, our lives miraculously spared by God's grace and the centurion's mercy. The sand, cold and gritty beneath my weary feet, felt like a precious pillow after those unending days at sea. We huddled together, a bewildered flock, our bodies aching, our minds still reeling. The first grey light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, a hesitant watercolour, and it was only as the sun began to cast its tentative, hopeful rays that we could truly see our new surroundings. An island, its rocky cliffs rising from the turbulent sea, dotted with sparse, hardy trees. A silent prayer of thanksgiving rose from my very core, grateful for land, for life, for this improbable salvation. Soon forms began to emerge from the island's interior, shadowy figures, then faces, etched with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They were the local inhabitants, observing us, the sea's strange bounty. I felt their gaze, a blend of fear and wonder, but their initial hesitation quickly dissolved into an extraordinary kindness that transcended language. They saw our shivering forms, our waterlogged clothes and hollow eyes that spoke of fear and famine, and their hearts, it seemed, were moved with a deep, human compassion. They led us to a sheltered cove, protected from the incessant biting wind. Here they began the primal ritual of fire-making. Dry branches, tinder, the scrape of stone brought forth a wisp of smoke, then a fragile dancing flame. Oh, the sheer relief, the crackle and hiss of the wood, the sweet, acrid smoke, the light pushing back encroaching shadows. We stretched our numb hands towards the growing warmth, feeling the blessed heat seep into our very bones, chasing the deep chill from us. It was a tangible act of mercy, a silent testament to the Lord's unwavering care, even in this distant, unknown land. Despite my exhaustion, a quiet energy stirred within me. I felt compelled to contribute. So I began to gather more wood, venturing beyond the warmth for branches to sustain our fire. The ground beneath my sandals was damp, the air thick with damp earth and foliage. I reached for a bundle of brushwood, my hand delving into the tangle, when suddenly a searing pain shot through my palm. A viper, slender and dark, likely driven out of its hiding place by the unfamiliar heat radiating from our fire, had fastened itself onto my hand, its fangs sunk deep. A gasp rippled through the islanders gathered by the fire. Murmuring voices turned to shouts, their faces contorting with alarm and a chilling recognition. I couldn't understand their words, but their frantic gestures, their wide, fearful eyes pointed at me. The snake, then the sea, painted a clear, grim picture. They believed, with a certainty that chilled me, that I must be a murderer, marked for retribution. The sea, they reasoned, had merely postponed my fate, delivering me here only for justice by a venomous serpent. Yet in that moment, a profound calm settled over me. I remembered the Lord's promise of protection. No fear entered my heart, only a quiet trust. With a gentle, deliberate motion, I shook my hand. The viper still clinging was dislodged, flying into the heart of the roaring flames, where it perished. Silence descended thick and heavy. The islanders, watching with bated breath, now stared, their expressions transforming. Fear drained from their faces, replaced by disbelief, then by open-mouthed awe. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices hushed, their eyes wide with wonder, pointing at me, then the ashes of the snake. They no longer saw a criminal facing justice. They saw a being touched by the divine, a god perhaps, immune to such earthly dangers. I knew I was no god, only a humble servant, but I sensed a shift in their hearts, a deeper reverence, an even greater kindness. They led us to a sheltered cove, safe from wind and waves. A fire danced a beacon against the chill, its fragrant smoke warming our weary bones. We huddled close, prisoners, soldiers, sailors, finding common warmth from the islanders' generosity. Publius, the chief man, opened his stone home to us, a refuge from the raw sea air. The 3 days he entertained us generously, providing fresh bread, tender fish, and simple wine, warming the spirit. Publius's gentle face held a shadow. His father, he explained, lay gravely ill, with a burning fever and dysentery. My heart stirred, remembering God's promise to spare our lives in the storm. This I knew was no coincidence. I asked to see him. Publius led me to a dimly lit chamber, heavy with stillness. On a simple pallet lay an old man, sweaty and breathing shallowly. His pain-clouded eyes barely registered me. He was so very weak. I knelt beside him. Publius watched with anxious hope. I offered a quiet prayer to the Lord who had guided me. Then with gentle certainty, I laid my hands upon the old man's brow, feeling the fever, and asked for God's healing touch. A familiar warmth, a power stirred within me. The fever began to break. Softly, steadily, his breathing deepened. His eyes opened, clear and lucid. Strength returned. Publius gasped, choked with joy, as his father sat up, colour returning to his face, a silent testament to the Lord's power. News spread swiftly. Soon others arrived, their faces etched with hope and desperation. They came with their sick, the lame, the feverish, the coughing children. Upon each one I laid hands and prayed. By God's grace, each was cured. A season of quiet miracles, proving God's purposes are never thwarted. Boundlessly grateful, the islanders honoured us with gifts, fish, honey, cloaks and provisions. The 3 months we stayed on Malta, awaiting winter's end. It was an unexpected pause, a divine detour, where I, a prisoner, became an instrument of healing. Finally, sailing season returned. A ship, the Castor and Pollux, was our vessel. Leaving Malta's hospitable shores, I carried the quiet joy of lives touched, knowing God's plan unfolds, even through shipwrecks and storms. The islanders, in their gratitude, honoured us generously with fresh fish, honey, cloaks and provisions. The 3 months we stayed on Malta, waiting for winter to pass. It was an unexpected pause, where a prisoner became an instrument of healing. Finally, the season for sailing returned, and the Castor and Pollux became our vessel. As we left Malta, I carried the quiet joy of lives touched, knowing God's plan unfolds, even through shipwrecks. Our new ship, the Castor and Pollux, felt like a gentle promise. After a tranquil passage, we put in at Syracuse on Sicily. We stayed 3 days, enjoying the scent of citrus and sea salt. A blessed reprieve. I remember walking ancient streets, a time for quiet reflection and prayer, for my soul to catch up after the strain. From Syracuse we sailed around the coast with a gentle wind. We arrived at Rhegium on the toe of Italy. After one day, a soft south wind sprang up, filling our sails and carrying us northward to Puteoli. Puteoli, the name itself whispered of nearing our destination. There we found brothers in the faith. Can you imagine the joy, after months as a prisoner, to find kindred spirits? They invited us to stay for 7 days, a whole week to share fellowship, break bread and speak of the Lord's faithfulness. It was a balm to my weary soul. From Puteoli, our final journey was by land. As we drew closer to Rome, brothers from Appii Forum and 3 taverns came out to meet us. At their sight my heart swelled with gratitude. I thanked God and took courage, knowing I was not alone. And so at last we came to Rome. It tasted of destiny, a dream made tangible. Though a prisoner, the Lord's hand guided every step. Julius the centurion allowed me to live alone, under a soldier's watch. Not the grand entrance I envisioned, but I was here, ready to preach. This journey of storms and quiet mercies had been a pilgrimage of profound trust. Each Roman footfall echoing the shipwreck and Malta's healing. Euraquila, the despair, the angel's promise, the splintered wood, Malta's fire, the healing, all woven into a tapestry of divine purpose. The true destination was never just a city, but unwavering trust in God's guidance, knowing His hand directs even life's wildest currents. My spirit, once tempest-tossed, now rests in a quiet, settled calm, a peace that surpasses all understanding. May you too find such peace, trusting that even through life's fiercest storms, God's loving hand guides you to a safe harbor, bringing deep restorative rest.